'Tis the season for many Arkansans to spend. How much and how? Almost 2 quarters down, 2 to go, looms the state's next fiscal year. Where does Arkansas need to build and how? And what does it need to overcome? Special edition of Arkansas Week next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for a special edition of Arkansas Week. We've officially entered the Christmas shopping season, an important time for retailers in Arkansas, as everywhere, and an important time for the nation's commerce. But holiday sales are but a piece of the overall economic pie. With a new year just around the corner, and with it a budget session of the General Assembly, we'll spend the next half hour looking at Arkansas's position, where we are, where we're heading, what we need to do. Joining us are 3 doctors acutely sensitive to the Arkansas economy. Dr. Michael Packo of UALR's Institute for Economic Advancement, Dr. John Shelnut, Chief Economist for the State Department of Finance and Administration, and Dr. Charles Venus, a consulting economist with decades of experience in Arkansas's private and public sectors. And gentlemen, thanks to all of you for coming in. John, Dr. Shelnut, we'll begin with you. Heading into the end of this year, we're now in the 3rd quarter of the fiscal, or second, excuse me, closing out the 2nd quarter of the fiscal. What does the revenue situation look like? How vibrant is the Arkansas economy right now?
We have fairly good growth.
Is vibrant the right word?
I would say it's good, not great.
All right.
It's good in the sense that wage withholding tax growth is up by 4.5%. That seems to be holding and continuing from last year. So that implies retail sales growth of about 3.5% at least. It could go higher in the short term with incentives and deals during the holidays.
And we also have jobless numbers that are among the best we've had in recent decades.
They're very low at 3.5%. Statistically, they're essentially the same as the nation. Both are very low.
Are you looking at anything at DF&A that would indicate an abrupt reversal in these fairly decent numbers?
We don't see anything coming from the economic side going into some of the economic related indicators. I think withholding income tax will hold up with good job growth in the next year. Sales tax has been erratic over the past year and a half or 2. There could be some pent-up demand out there. I think lending standards are higher for things like subprime borrowing for automobile purchases. That has been holding down sales tax to some extent, but in general, the economy looks fairly stable and on a upward trend.
Collections, obviously the big thing that the General Assembly will have to keep an eye on, always does, with a fiscal session coming up. Appropriations going to have to be made. Caution, I would surmise, would be your watchword, your advice, your admonition.
It is the long-term pattern of being cautious with forecasting and budgets in Arkansas.
Yeah. Dr. Packo.
Well, I'd have to agree in general with Dr. Shelnut's assessment that economic growth is positive. Things are moving in the right direction. There's some uneven distribution of gains across the state. Over half the counties in Arkansas are experiencing negative population and employment growth. So there's really a fairly small sector or section of the Arkansas economy that's really experiencing the positive growth, and that's concentrated in the metropolitan areas, northwest Arkansas, Jonesboro, northeast Arkansas, and to some extent the Little Rock area, the central Arkansas metropolitan area. And other more rural parts of the state are still feeling some pain from job losses that they experienced 10 years ago now during the recession that still have failed to recover.
Take a look at population trend, population trends mostly. Some portions of the state, large sections of it, continue to just apparently hemorrhage population. This has some pretty significant implications for policy on a number of levels, particularly for urban areas.
Yes, I mean, it's both demographic and economic. I think where we're seeing the job growth is in the service providing sectors. The job losses have occurred primarily in manufacturing and some other goods producing areas. And so what that means is that because service providing portions of the economy tend to be concentrated in the metropolitan areas, that's where the job growth is. The other areas of the state which suffered the manufacturing losses, there's very little to replace that at this point. So, as you put it, we're losing population and jobs in many areas of the state.
Charles Venus, I can't believe you're terribly surprised by these trends.
No, I'm not surprised, Steve. A good many years ago, I used to teach about the 4 states of Arkansas, which is essentially northwest Arkansas, the Delta, the southern plains, and the cities, being 4 distinct geographic areas, and that's still true today. But we do have a lot of shifting going on. Northwest Arkansas is the growth center of the state now and will remain so for an indefinite future. The state's doing reasonably well, and I think it will continue to do that. You need to look at the cities because we've got Northwest Arkansas booming. Little Rock is in trouble in many, many ways. It is no longer leading the state as it did. Hot Springs is in trouble, and its growth is slowing down. Some of the southern cities are doing better, while the Delta has serious problems that are not going away and haven't done much better for a long time. Pine Bluff, Helena, cities like that are in serious trouble. So you've got a geographic dichotomy now in the states. It's a continuation of the past. Overall, we're doing pretty well.
Let me go to on the policy front. It's going to get, again, if these trends continue, and you gentlemen seem to agree that there's nothing in the near term that's going to reverse them. I mean, Arkansas is becoming urbanized.
Yes.
It's going to become more and more, it would seem, more and more difficult for the smaller counties, those that are losing population in the South, in the Delta, to afford deliver even basic service tax bases.
It is a challenge that needs to be dealt with when counties, municipalities are losing population, losing tax base. You need to work both on economic development, finding replacements for those job opportunities, and also manage the decline in some cases when there's no other alternative. And that definitely can be a challenge.
Managing a decline. Please.
Well, I think if you look at, for instance, the population of Pine Bluff, the metropolitan area, and the city itself, it's requiring a look at the geographic boundaries, the city services that can be provided, some rethinking of exactly how that metropolitan area works. I don't think there aren't many others in the state that are in a similar situation. It's more the rural areas that we're having to look at the budgetary strains of losses in population and jobs.
Yeah, John Schill. Now these trends are reflected in the data that you're collecting out there.
Yeah, we do see a concentration of growth in northwest Arkansas, pulling up the state average in order to meet and track the U.S. average. So that should tell you that the balance of state, excluding northwest Arkansas, is below. And part of it, the reason of that is government has been flat. That affects central Arkansas. Retail has been flat or declining at different times over the past 2 years. So these are fairly large sectors with no growth. across the state, and the government is not that significant in northwest Arkansas. It's the private sector growing in that part of the state.
Let me stick with retail for a second, if I can, because not just because of Christmas, by any stretch of the imagination, although Christmas makes a good time to bring this up, and that's e-commerce. Does it continue to gnaw away at the sales tax base in Arkansas?
It is. It's dangerous.
Well, as of the most recent statistics we have, e-commerce accounts for about 9% of retail sales nationwide. That's up from about 4.5% just a decade ago. So that's a doubling of its share. So it's increasingly taking up a larger share of retail, but still, even at 10%, it's not an overwhelming share of total sales. It is projected to continue growing, and so that's changing the nature of the retail marketplace.
Yeah, we're collecting some now.
That's correct.
We are collecting some.
I'm talking sales taxes on.
We are collecting some by voluntary payments from companies that have no presence in Arkansas. And then we are tapping into that growth of existing retailers that have physical presence who are really ramping up in e-commerce. So we are participating in collections.
Yeah.
On the state level, the online sales become a problem simply because the inability to collect sales tax on them, and that will eventually be cured. I think the states are going to demand that they get sales taxes. It can become a problem in the short run, but on the state level, the biggest problem we have right now is the problem of transportation expenditures, highway. More and more as automobiles change, particularly with electric car coming in higher mileage, you have to back off and understand for every bit of infrastructure you have in a society, you got to thereafter take care of it. So the maintenance of the existing infrastructure begins to absorb a bigger and bigger portion of the pie being able to be spent. And now we got the pie slipping out from under us because those highway taxes are going down. Obviously, we're going to have to start taxing mileage instead of gasoline. You've got to keep that up, and whether you like it or not, the infrastructure cost can become a black hole. The more you get, the more you got to take care of it, the more you got to spend. The higher proportion of your budget goes to just taking care of what you have. So that's a big danger on the state level. Other than that, the biggest problem we have that I'm looking at is the volatility of certain kinds of tax income, like the personal and corporate income tax, because a recession nationwide impacts in Arkansas, and those are the first two taxes that start falling off. And depending on where you are in the fiscal year, it used to be a drop of 25 or 30 million would happen, and you'd have to try to take care of that. That can now be 130, 150 million. And you've got to find that, and if you're in the last quarter of a fiscal year, you're in big trouble with the agencies trying to cut their budgets. And we are improving that by the rainy day funds that are held by the state to be able to make up for that. But Governor Huckabee was the last governor that got trapped in that deal, and we were doing fine. All of a sudden we were down by 130 million or so, and it was late in the fiscal year and they had to make that up. But it's a big danger on the state level that in the short run you can run into those fiscal dumps that you got to try to make up. And since we can't deficit spend in Arkansas, you got to be ready for those impacts. And as I say, they have gotten larger and larger.
Well, and the margin for error would seem to have gotten smaller and smaller. We made some policy decisions in the last couple of years here at the state to shrink the general revenue pie. Tax cuts.
It tends to make you short-run oriented at the state level. Your fear of something going to happen, and like I said, we're trying to make up for it by saving rainy day funds to be able to put up with that. But my best example is that China, for example, is overdue for a recession. It's growth way past due for recession. A serious recession in China can mess up the world enough to come back here and impact in Arkansas over the overall economy. So it's not just things that are taking place here or necessarily things that are taking place in the United States, but other places can now impact us. And the more prepared we can be for that, the better off we are. But to think we have gotten away from having recessions, or other nations have gotten away from having recessions, particularly a nation like China, which is in the beginning part of capitalism. They're in their economic development where we were 150 years ago. And by the way, the average American is still 5 times as rich as the average China guy is. But it's they're going to have a lot of volatility like we did when we passed through those pieces of capitalism. It's inherent in the nature of capitalism. So I don't want to overemphasize. I'm just saying that kind of thing could impact us more than they used to be able to do it.
5-10 years ago, I think the phrase was from a former Fed chairman was what I think unnatural exuberance or something to that effect. We were now in what, John, the 100th or so month of continued economic expansion. The recession per se is a thing of the past. It skipped over a lot of people. Now, in the near term, we talked about the near term and no obvious warning signs other than a stock market that is just through the roof. But as we tape this program, there is word of fresh political turmoil in Germany. They can't breathe the air in India. The UK is what Britain's pulling out of the European market. Michael, what do you see? Are all our predictions pretty tenuous?
Well, there's always uncertainties when it comes to looking at the future. Certainly, a downturn
and a new change at the Fed.
Well, yes, and that's one of the risks. The downturn in the Chinese economy or other major trading partners around the world, that Dr. Venus mentioned, would be certainly one risk factor in the outlook. Some other factors are a resurgence in energy prices that would tend to benefit some energy-producing sectors and states, but overall it might have a negative impact on economic growth. Another possibility is as the Fed raises interest rates, that might slow down the rate of investment spending. I'm not too concerned about that unless the Fed gets way out there on a limb. I think at this point their moves are putting us in a position more of normality than any risk for the economy. But those are some of the uncertainties looking forward as to whether this period of decent but nothing to write home about economic growth will continue.
Yeah, coming back to something that Charles Venus said a second ago, and that was that it leapt out at me and certainly the audience, I suspect as well, or a fair share of it, and that's that the Little Rock SMSA is in a bit of trouble.
It's not growing like it was. Neither is Hot Springs, by the way.
Yeah.
They're just slowing down. Part of Little Rock's problem is it has no longer exist as a central city in Arkansas. It just doesn't anymore. The dynamics are up in Northwest. And Little Rock has done fairly well, but it hasn't put itself together in a way that can lead the state anymore. And I don't know that there's any answer to that. I don't know that that's not a permanent loss. Because when you got an area as dynamic as Northwest Arkansas is, and it's a fairly old city like Little Rock that's contained by other cities, it's a difficult thing to do. And once you lose that momentum, it's very, very difficult to get it back. Little Rock's not the only one, of course. I mentioned Hot Springs, and that's kind of surprised me, but if you watch the last few years of numbers coming out for Hot Springs, they're pretty bad. Loss of employment and income relative to what we've known as Hot Springs in the past. And you mentioned before the problems and successes of urbanization in a state like ours. And we have urbanized fairly rapidly over the last 50 years. in a state that was completely rurally dominant 50 years ago, it's no longer the case. But the big bugaboo is Northwest Arkansas and what's going to happen to the state as it develops. How do you pick up and help the rest of the state, or is it possible?
Yeah. Mike?
Well, I'd like to temper the negativity about Little Rock. We certainly aren't experiencing the rapid growth in Little Rock that we're seeing in Northwest Arkansas. That part of the state is leading the economy, but Central Arkansas still has a presence in, well, of course, government, education, healthcare. Those are all stable and growing industries. I think the real strong areas of the state, Northwest Arkansas, but also Jonesboro is booming. Yes, it's smaller to begin with, so it doesn't have a big impact on the whole state. But it's doing well. Little Rock's holding its own. It's the other smaller metropolitan areas and the rural parts of the state that I think where we really see the problems. Where Northwest Arkansas and Northeast Arkansas are pulling up the average. Little Rock's about on average.
If we were to ask where in 2018, beginning in 2000 or now, how to build Arkansas, how to move the state forward economically, is that the wrong question? Is the question, in fact, how do we rescue the Delta? How do we rescue?
If it is the right question, we don't know the answer. Put it that way. If it's the right question, we don't have the foggiest notion how to do it.
Yeah.
The Delta problem is 50, 60 years old and not getting much better. And that is to say that the Delta still controls a hell of a bunch of wealth. And the agricultural sector is more and more productive all the time. It hasn't carried the rest of the population with it. That was solved between, say, 40 and 30 years ago by outmigration. And that's slowed down as it almost had to because you were running out of population to leave. I think the question may be the right one. How do we guide Arkansas? But I'll have to tell you, we don't know.
Well, I think other states are facing this problem. The difference is most of the other states have a million-plus population city to lean on and to drive growth, to drive the whole state average. We don't have that in Arkansas. We have medium-sized metropolitan areas, and we're relying on one of them to drive the state average currently. We've known about the manufacturing jobs problem for decades, and we've done pretty well here and there. In Mississippi County, for example, the steel plants, that's essentially a newer version of the steel industry being built there. Jonesboro did well with its strategy of value-added agriculture counted as manufacturing, with major companies in that business, in that area. So we have some successful heavy industry and traditional industry around the state, but we're missing in the million-plus city example, and those are the ones that are peeling off jobs from the really high-cost cities like San Francisco and Seattle. So we're missing that segment of migration of high-skilled, high-wage service sector professionals. We need to attract them.
Yeah. Michael, when Charles Vina says we don't know the answers, we ask the question, we don't know the answers. Do you?
I certainly don't know the answers. I think it's worth pointing out that one of the areas of weakness we're seeing nationwide, and it fits into this metropolitan versus rural mix, is a slowdown in new firms, in entrepreneurial activity. Small firms and particularly new businesses are where a lot of job growth comes from, and that's been rather slow, except for a few pockets around the country. There are these areas of entrepreneurial activity, the larger cities, particularly in high technology areas, where we're seeing that, but it's pretty slow elsewhere, and I think that's true in Arkansas as well.
Yeah, Charles, you were always an advocate of small business. You said the numbers tell the story.
Well, there's no question that small businesses produce more jobs than big businesses, but going back to what was said a couple minutes ago, you used to be able to get a factory and produce, for example, Fort Smith, with the Whirlpool plant, there's 4,000 or 5,000 employees. The latest numbers out of Fort Smith came out yesterday, and they're going to give X millions of dollars to get 50 to 100 jobs. The cost per job, and you simply don't get those enormous numbers that we used to get. Now you get a steel mill up in Blytheville, and the workers are paid $70,000 to $80,000 a year for steel workers, but they only have 50 of them. So the numbers are the problem. Where do you get jobs in numbers enough to soak up the unemployed or the unemployed population? You just don't find it anymore. Getting a plant to move 2,000 jobs is just horribly hard to find.
Well, in the low-growth industrial countries, the answer is cities are pulling in workers and skilled workers into those centers from a nation that essentially is low growth. So they're concentrating the workforce around those centers.
Yeah, got to end it there because we're just out of time. Gentlemen, doctors, thank you very much for being in. We'll call you back.
You mean it's over?
You want more time?
Yeah, I got something
Come
else
back.
to say.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.